dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident.
Hey guys, it's Eric here, and in this video we're joined by Sarah Saeed. Sarah is a public policy professional with a keen interest in policy development and implementation. She also works in the Irish Parliament, or the Houses of the Oireachtas, for a government minister. She's a former UCD teaching assistant in international relations, theories of international relations, comparative politics, and political theory. Sarah comes from a diverse heritage, giving her an insight into more than one lens. I met Sarah on a web show called Gorm TV, on which she shared her views on identity politics, which really resonated with me and reminded me of my own. So I decided to have her on my channel to chat about the subject. In the video, we distinguish the positive use of identity politics as a device for social justice from the use of identity politics as a means to perceive people in society and see them as solely members of the identitarian groups they fall into, and not as individuals. We talk about the vicious rise in identity politics on the right. We talk about the inviolability of the dichotomy we tend to draw between types of people who supposedly criticize identity politics and support it. We talk about the importance of taking a unified approach to tackling issues particular people face because of their identity and the role of identity politics in public policy. It was greatly refreshing making this video with Sarah, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy watching it. Hey guys, it's Eric here, and I am back with another video, and I'm so happy to say that in this video I am joined by Sarah.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, so how I'm going to begin is by briefly defining identity politics, talking about what I think the merits are to identity politics, what I think the flaws are to identity politics, before you can kind of let everyone watching know what your opinion is regarding identity politics. Mm-hmm. Perfect. No, so identity politics, based on kind of definitions provided that I've seen from Cambridge, the Cambridge Dictionary, the Oxford Dictionary, and Urban Dictionaries also, is a politics that places emphasis on the importance of groups or group thinking. So that group can be defined in racial terms, in ethnic terms, national terms, political terms. So identity politics, that's essentially what it is. I think it plays an important role when it comes to acknowledging the issues and the problems that particular people face as a result of their identity. So, for instance, in the United States of America in the 1950s, Black Americans were subjugated and faced a lot of legislative and social barriers as a result of their race. So it took a form of identity politics to acknowledge that, to get Black people past those barriers and hurdles. But my critiques of identity politics, ironically, are not necessarily based on politics, because I think in political conversations about identity politics, we tend to simplistically dichotomize positions that you can take. You can either be, that Gen Z snowflake young person who takes an absolutist position when it comes to identity politics and sees it as like sacrosanct and the only way you can see the world, or you can be like that hateful right-winger or boomer who's sick of the young people finally having conversations as to the barriers people face because of their identity. But like identity politics, I think it's too simple, that dichotomy. My critiques of identity politics are very much based on humanistic principles. I think it disregards human complexity. I think it makes the false assumption that because of my identity, because of immutable, unchangeable characteristics that are out of my control, it provides people with a clear, accurate picture as to how I navigate my life. And I simply don't think it's as simple as that. So take, for example, me being male. For a long time, we've had a set traditional definition as to what it actually means to be a man within our society. So if you look at me and my masculinity and feel that my masculinity mandates me to act the way, in quotation marks, a male is supposed to act, you're completely disregarding the complexity of my individualism and my humanity, because you're relegating my identity to my masculinity. You're assuming that before getting to know Eric, you think my masculinity means that I have to talk a certain way, walk a certain way, and act a certain way. And things are not as simple as that. And you can apply that to race, gender, or even your sexuality, assuming that because people fall within particular identitarian brackets, they're going to or supposed to act in a particular way. And something that really struck me that you did in our episode with Gorm TV is you spoke about somebody you knew who was a Trump supporter, and you kind of talked about how you didn't see him supporting Trump as him being a hateful individual. You look past the Trump supporting veil, his political association, to see him for who he was. And you saw that as a phase in his life that he was going to go through and grow out of. I think when it comes to characteristics and political affiliation, we tend to define people on that basis rather than look past that and simply see it as an aspect or a facet of who they are, to appreciate the larger, complex picture of their individual identity. So this is my critique of identity politics. I think it simplifies human complexity, and I don't think that's a way in which we need to operate when it comes to how we interact with one another within society. Would you like to let the people know whether you disagree or agree with what I said, and then let us know?
I do agree with you in a lot of points, and to some extent. I remember my first kind of moment of understanding identity politics was when I was studying my undergrad. I studied political science and international relations at UCD, and what was interesting was the tutor went around the classroom and he asked everyone, he was like, so what do you identify as, And funny enough, I was the last person he had to ask. So everybody was really sure of themselves, I'm economically right and I'm, socially left. And they went around the whole, class, and it came to me and I kind of was like, well, I'm going to say something that you're probably not going to like. And he kind of looked at me and I said, I'm not going to have you box me. And he was like, sorry. And I said, yeah, I'm not going to have you box me and put me into a box and just do a tick next to it, because I'm still learning, I'm still growing, I'm still, finding who I am and understanding the world that I live in. And my lived experiences are also very different to the person sitting to me on my right and on my left. So, that you cannot box someone in that sense. But in terms of identity politics, what is it? It's basically, over the years, people in society's ethnic minorities or different, groups have, sought to get recognition on a policy level. They have, been denied certain rights. For example, the LGBT community in Ireland weren't allowed to marry. They didn't have that right, and then we had the marriage equality referendum. So, it is important in that sense, but now we're going down another road that I fear. And that is, for example, yes, on the left side of politics, let's say there is a lot of, identity politics with regards to human rights and social justice issues. But now we're seeing it on the far right, whereas you've got the rise of, far right groups, white supremacy and so on. And that is also a part of identity politics. And it's a side of identity politics that is kind of dangerous, to be honest, because what happens is, instead of being inclusive and providing a safe space for people, we're starting to box ourselves in our little boxes and have this kind of groupthink, tunnel vision view of life, and that's dangerous to go down that road. So that would be my understanding of how things are with identity politics.
I would totally agree with you, Sarah. Totally agree with you. I think we're seeing a vicious rise in identity politics in the right. I think Donald Trump undoubtedly represented that. I think he sparked a kind of identitarian movement within the right, where people, they relished in their particular identitarian factors and facets. Whether it's white supremacy, people kind of appreciating their whiteness in America in the context of Donald Trump, and seeing that as a kind of spur to politics and to going out there and politicking in a hateful way, or other kind of fascist kind of movements that we've seen rise in Europe also.
Yeah, and then you'll have people who will say to us, to yourself and I, say, that's quite a centrist position that you're taking on things. You're beating around the bush. You're not getting to the root causes of these things, or you're just you seem to be swaying from one side to the next, and not you're not basically, you're saying how it ought to be or how it should be from a philosophical perspective rather than how it actually is on the ground. But funny enough, we both come from backgrounds where, we face, let's say, discrimination, or we face that added obstacle in society when we don't have certain privileges that our counterparts may have. So, I find it hard, because part of me is like, okay, are you going to always continue to come to me based on what you see rather than knowing me, you know? So for this idea of when it comes to racism or discrimination, that, oh, we'll go to Sarah regards racism and discrimination because she knows what that's all about, you know? And that's not necessarily the case, you know? So that's what happens to identity politics is, again, like I said earlier on, it boxes us into certain kind of categories because for some reason, it's like, as I don't know whether it's human nature, or that's probably a different discussion, but do we feel comfortable in boxing people? So that way, when I go to Eric, I'll treat Eric in a specific way and I'll talk to Eric in a specific way and I'll be careful not to say certain things and so on and so forth, you know, because he identifies to a certain way, you know? So it becomes, we don't become fluid in how we engage with each other or seamless, you know, and we start to look at each other from an angle of what you tick rather than who you are and what you have to give and so on. So I think that's a concern of mine. So those who say, you know, you're beating around the bush and taking a centrist position, I don't really think that's the case, because what happens is we end up not listening to one another. And we end up building a wall and hiding behind that wall. And if you can imagine, you know, medieval times where you get up on top of, you know, your wall and you've got your arrow out, and if someone says something against you, you're just ready to fire. And that's not the way we should be treating things, you know. We should be treating things and kind of trying to understand the different perspective. Well, why do you think I'm like this? You know, what is it that you have against Irish Arabs or, you know, Black Irish? Well, what's the issue exactly? You know, and trying to understand that. Rather than, you know, just putting up a wall and saying, sorry, you shouldn't say that, that's it, end of discussion. It's trying to, you know, it's a two-way street. And I think it's about integration as well, and integrating our viewpoints and our opinions, you know, rather than, you know, just putting us in our little boxes and saying, stay in that box, you know. I think that's, the thing is as well, another point is it also gives rise to populism and political parties using certain political identities in order to gain wins, so for the next general election, or for, you know, to meet certain constituents or appease to certain constituents. And yet again, that is dangerous, because that's not what public policy is about. Public policy is about the public interest, which is inclusive and brings in everybody in our society.
That was fantastically articulated, Sarah. I absolutely agree with you. And just to briefly draw on what you said about people, you know, assuming that we're playing the role of the enlightened centrist, or the centrist who's unwilling to dig their toes into the crux of the issue, which is, I think, not true. You just to acknowledge those sentiments for a moment. I think, the example I recurrently point to when people bring those arguments to me when I engage in conversation with them about identity politics is Martin Luther King. You know, he operated as an activist in a time of fierce virulence and hatred, where because of his blackness, was subjected to hatred, legislative violence, and a lot of barriers that are non-existent today, but were then. But in the midst of all the racial identitarian violence that he faced, he embraced a policy of humanism. He still, he thought, white racists within America were not only doing a disservice to black people, but to themselves, because they were not hurting black people as a people that were separate to who they are. They were hurting brothers and sisters of them. And they were ignorant as to the fact that the black people that they were hurting were a part of the human family with them. But nonetheless, they were hurting people that were a part of the human family. So he embraced this policy of togetherness, of oneness, that overlooked identitarian obstacles and barriers that divide us, even though he had no right to, because he was being subjugated because of the color of his skin. Yet now, when we live in times where such racial violence, is not existent in the way that it once did, it manifests itself, but not in as a way that is as aggressive and egregious as it once was. We are choosing to uphold a policy that is the opposite of such, togetherness and humanism, that is based on divisive barriers and models that sees us being divided rather than united. Why not uptake that model that is more sustainable and that sees us coming together, not to tackle one person's issues as the issue of one community only, but as a human issue that we all have a role to fight in. I think once you adopt a divisive model when it comes to tackling issues, it just allocates the burden and the onus to deal with those issues to the community that is dealing with those issues directly, when we all have a role to play when it comes to tackling problems. I think Martin Luther King's message encompassed this. And ironically speaking, in a time when we don't face such racial violence, but not to that magnitude, we're neglecting that message.
Yeah, we are, and I think as well, like we have to remember that people are, going through their own learning journey, as I said earlier on, and like we don't know what stone is in each person's shoe. We don't know what's going on in their private lives, and I think as well we are all going through this systemic, whether be it systemic racism that we're suffering, whether it's gender, whether it's class inequalities. We are facing inequalities, and we have to work together to address this. And I think that's fundamentally important. We can't pit social justice issues against each other in order for survival of the fittest, because it becomes a zero sum competition, like a game, that my issues that I'm facing are more important than yours, that way. There's a systemic issue going on, and we need to address that and work together on that. And that, leads to, one of your questions regards kind of the role of public policy, and in terms of that, like that requires, basically what I want to say is the state doesn't have a role in kind of addressing, and shouldn't have a role in addressing identity politics, because then that means the state would, define what it means to be Irish. And that's a very dangerous territory to go down. What I do believe that the state has a role in is inclusive education policy. We should be, learning about, Black history. We should be learning about, Arab philosophers and scientists. We should be broadening our horizons when it comes to knowledge. We should be more, it's about active citizenship. And we should be, as a public policy makers, we should be activating and helping people on the ground, grassroots movements and civil societies to, empower them and allow them to take the lead in this task, in ensuring an inclusive society. I think that would be an important thing, because I think if it's from a top down perspective, it's dangerous, because we need the lens of those who are marginalized in society to tell us what they are going through and how to address the issues from a bottom up, and then that meets the top down. So it's about working together, that way.
Thank you so much for that. It's so good to get someone who works in policy, does great work in policy, to share their perspective as to how policy can influence society in a way that encompasses identity politics and the important role that it has to play. And I completely agree with you. And the voices of the marginalized need to be heard in any conversation as to how we can progress in a way that acknowledges the problems people face because of their identity, but on a basis that unites people, as you said there. Okay, so I'm going to do something. Go on, sorry.
No, I think as well, I think it's important just to add as well that, we need more people of color and more people from our different marginalized groups. We need more people from the traveling community. We need more people from LGBT community engaging in the policy-making sphere, whether that's in the halls, of power down in Leinster House, or if it's, within the Oireachtas, or whether it's, from, a grassroots level, but also an NGO level, engaging with policymakers. I think that's really, really important. And we need to see more of that type of activism and that type of active citizenship as well.
Yep, absolutely. And something I liked when you spoke on Gorm TV, and I like here also in how you're articulating your view on identity politics, is you're powerfully speaking about how it can be used as a device for social justice, and not merely as a lens or a spectacle through which we judge people. We shouldn't relegate people to boxes or to categories, as we tend to do as human beings, because we like to simplify things. It's so easy to see someone for their characteristics, but not see someone for who they are. Because to see someone for who they are, as you said, you have to look beyond that veil of identity and actually get to know the individual. And that takes effort. And we can be lazy sometimes.
That's true. I think it's as Rawls said, it's removing that veil of ignorance, and just removing it and going back to the ordinary, state of human nature, and getting to know Eric for Eric rather than Eric then for anything else. And I think that's really important. And I think as well, the media has a role, in that. And I'll sound like a broken record on that. I think they have a key role, and I think it's important as well that, you know, people from marginalized communities or ethnic minority groups are more engaged with the media as well and have a voice, and also are writing, are you know, that they go into the role of journalism, and that they talk and voice themselves and articulate through their work from this lens, because that's really important. It's diversifying on how we see things in society, and that can only be a good thing.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to do something that is quite unconventional, something that is quite unorthodox, and the fact that I'm going to assume the role of someone who hitherto, up until now, has only been able to socially analyze people and appraise people on the basis of identity politics, or in other words, completely, you know, just attach people's true identity to their identitarian characteristics. So identity politics has been the only lens through which they could see the world and to see people. But now they've heard Sarah speak and are convinced that it's not necessarily the way, that there are far other ways and far other methods they can utilize to see people for who they truly are. To that person, you know, how else do you think they can see the world? If they're neglecting the absolutist identity political position, how else do you think they can see the world moving forward?
I think that person they need to see life differently, in the sense that, you know, everybody is the same. You know, we're all human, you know what I mean? How they view themselves is how they should view others, you know, that way, how they want to be viewed for themselves, you know. So if they want someone to look beyond the veil, let's say, then look beyond the veil yourself as well, you know. So it's about being an active citizen. And that takes a lot of effort, to be honest. And as you said earlier on, it's so easy to just, you know, look at people through the box and, you know, what's next to them or characterized, and that's it. But no, we have to look at people beyond that, because I, Sarah, I'm more than, you know, I'm more than just a woman, or more than an Irish Arab, or more than, you know. So get to know me a little bit more, because in that I have a lot of lived experiences that I can share with you, and I would like to know more about your lived experiences. So it's about listening, it's about engaging, it's about, you know, going over and beyond the simple box ticking and assuming and making assumptions about people. And it's also, you know, understanding that people go on a learning journey, and you don't have to be rigid in how you think, you know what I mean? If you have always gone your life, you know, seeing people as, well, you know, they're, you know, Muslims and they think that certain way and whatever, and they're, Jewish and they think a certain way, and they're Christian and that's it, and so on. No, come on, you know, it's okay to try and get to know them more, and that people, you know, opinions change, and to embrace that, and not to be afraid. Sometimes I wonder if there's fear behind those assumptions and those, you know, easy way of seeing kind of people is next to that box ticking exercise, you know, that maybe don't be afraid. It's okay to step out of your comfort zone and get to know people from beyond the veil.
Wow, incredible. Okay, I'm going to, you know, continue assuming the role of this person who has now been convinced that identity politics is not the best basis on which to see people. You know, he wants to be able to critique identity politics, but not in a way that refers to that kind of political dichotomy I touched on earlier, where you can only be a boomer who hates identity politics because he or she's not okay with people having earnest, honest discussions as to the barriers and obstacles people face because of their identity, or that absolutist, religious, identitarian type person who just believes in identity politics as, you know, a religion, the best way to see the world. How do you think we can critique identity politics, let's say, without falling into the category of that boomer?
That's a very good question. I think it's just through critical analysis, you know, being able to critically think, you know, that identifying that the person is a person firstly, you know, the person is a human, you know, for example, look at Sarah, you know, Sarah's, you know, her father is, you know, Irish, but originally from North Africa, and her mom's Irish. You know, you're not going to say, oh, well, Sarah's North African and that's it, because her dad's North African. So you have to look beyond that, you know. And so it's about understanding first and foremost that Sarah is a human. You know, she's a human, she's a woman, and getting to know her and being able to look at, you know, things through a different lens, and not everything is through your own lens, and not to have a tunnel vision, and to kind of embrace hearing different opinions, because that's first first and foremost important is to be able to listen and then engage and ask questions, and not to be afraid to ask questions. You know, I'm going to throw that question back at you. How would you tell that person?
Yeah, that's it.
You advise them.
Well, yeah, no, your response was incredibly optimistic and very empowering. I guess with me, you know, being someone who has tried to, you know, uptake a position of nuance when it comes to subjects like identity politics, and not kind of subscribe to the idea that you can fall into one box or the other. I've encountered from some of my friends a lot of pushback and a lot of people that say that, it's very easy when you criticize something that, let's say hateful right wingers claim always criticize. It's very easy for a lot of what you say to be reminiscent of what they might say, and this applies to the left also. But what you might be actually trying to do is criticize it from a unique perspective. But because it tends to be a particular person that criticizes it, it's easy for people to shift you into that box because it's easy. So as long as I am acting in a bona fide way, and as long as people that take the time to understand why I'm speaking in the way I am find out that I know that I am acting in a bona fide way, I'm not too concerned, because those who don't take the time to understand that I'm acting in good faith are those who are trying to categorize me in an unfair way. So I can't be concerned with their lack of effort. But those who do take the effort have to see that I'm coming from a good place. And if they do, I'm not concerned. So yes, just act in good faith and don't be concerned with those who are not willing to understand that you're acting out of the goodness of your heart in a way that, progresses society, and in a way that you think at this time is the best way to think in terms of how you can push society forward in a progressive way. So this would be my advice.
I think that's very good advice, and I think it just highlights that society, we have become very cynical in how we view people and how we view others. And I hope we come back to a point in our lives that that we do understand that this life is a journey. You know what I mean? And knowledge is a journey. And the more we ask, the more we engage, the more we learn. We're still going through that journey. Your 20s is different to your 30s is different to your 40s, and so on. So we need to engage in that way that, I'm learning, every day is going to be different, and not to assume the position of, oh, this person is acting in bad faith. So exactly, a person is acting in good faith. And that's really important, because if we don't do that, then we just view life in a miserable, cynical way, and we will never progress as a society. And we need to start looking at each other in a positive light and trying to understand, even if it's hard, even if someone says something that is so difficult and completely hurts you to your core, and it you feel like, oh, hold on a moment, you're insulting me, rise above that ego and actually say, well, hold on a moment, what do you mean by that? And do you understand what you're saying? And engaging with that person, because we really do need to look inward, and we have to look at our egos and understand our egos and how to address that.
That was just absolutely brilliant. Like, I'm taken aback. I'm quite astonished with how you put that. And that perfectly brings us to the end of our video. I must say that this video was absolutely refreshing, incredibly refreshing. I think we need far more voices like yours in the realm of conversation.
I'm yours.
Thank you so much. But we need people like you who are willing to see the bigger picture, who are willing to neglect kind of immediate, impulses of satisfaction, that we sometimes feel, that the ego sometimes can amp up, wanting to get people back, revenge, the unwillingness to look past that veil, and people who are willing to see what a sustainable Ireland will look like in terms of political discourse and dialogue, in terms of togetherness and how we can progress. And I think you perfectly encapsulate that voice and represent that voice. So continue to speak, Sarah, because you're pretty awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. Same to you, and keep up with this. This is great.
Thanks so much, Sarah. So I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. I'm sure you did. If you want to check out Sarah, I'm going to link in some of the Gorm TV videos that we did. And if Sarah's okay with it, I can link in her Twitter account in the description. So please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like the video if you do, and let us know some of your opinions in the comment section. I'll be back with another video very, very soon, and I hope to have Sarah on soon again. Bye.
Thank you.